Mishcon Academy digital sessions.
Hello everyone, my name is Anthony Julius. It's a great pleasure and a privilege for me to introduce Professor Diane Coyle to our Academy event this afternoon. Professor Coyle is at Cambridge. Before that, she was a professional economist working in government and has also had a career in journalism. And her book, Cogs and Monsters, which is the book that we're talking about now. So welcome, Diane, to our Academy event. It's extremely kind of you to give up your time to talk to us today.
Thank you for the invitation and looking forward to it.
While we were chatting before this session, we acknowledged that between the first publication date of the book and today, where the immediate crisis, complex political economic crisis that your book squarely addresses, which was the COVID pandemic, had already been superseded by the horrors of the Ukraine. I just wondered what your sense was, or perhaps in this respect, of how it is that it's even possible to make judgments about crises because of the accelerated speed with which we are hit by one crisis after another. And then perhaps as a second approach, whether you think some of the more COVID-specific issues that you address in the book are no longer effective as responses given the Ukraine.
I'm not going to pretend to expertise on Ukraine.
No.
In a funny way, I think that this conflict actually reinforces some of the issues that have been raised by the pandemic, and particularly the question about supply chains, because one of the things that we realized with a shock in the past couple of years was that we don't have a very good understanding of these very complex global production chains. And the vaccines themselves are a great example, because each little step in the chain turns out to be quite specialist, and only one or two companies around Europe or even beyond do them, making the very big plastic bags in which you grow the agents, or being able to put them into tiny vials and so on, incredibly specialist activities. And we're going to see similar supply chain shocks through food and fertilizer now with the energy and grain shocks because of the crisis. I suppose the other thing to which economists will turn their attention is predicting how bad the downturn or the inflation will be in the short and medium term, and then ultimately, and hopefully before too long, thinking about reconstruction. And these are areas where this is, the profession does have something to say. We've got experience of how to think about these things. Recession
attracts a certain kind of economic expertise and thinking. How do we get into the recession is one kind of question, but bracketing that for the moment, how do we get out of a recession? What are the economic tools that are available to us?
There are some tried and tested tools, and the tools you pick depend on the character of the crisis. And you will pick different tools for a straightforward recession, as compared to one that's been prompted by supply shocks, so you get inflation at the same time. There are different policy choices to be made about that. And then again, if it brings another systemic financial crisis in its wake, because we don't know what the consequences of Russian debt default are going to be. And the policy response, what economists advise, has to depend on the turn of events. But on all of those fronts, we do have some understanding now of how to do it. And actually, I think the financial crisis itself was a good example of that, because the mistakes were not made that had been made in the 1930s. So although we've had a period of very slow growth and no improvement in people's standard of living since the financial crisis of 2008, we've not had another Great Depression. And that has to count as a success story for economics, I think. Very much helped having Ben Bernanke at the Fed at the time as a historian of the Great Depression.
Yes. So this is in a sense, economists come out of your account better in their analysis of how to get out of the recession than in your analysis of how we got into that recession in any event. Is it that economists are better on finding ways to improve things than predicting when things are going to go wrong?
I think there are a few things happening, and one is that the financial crisis itself, but particularly the Brexit vote for UK economists, had been a real shock and meant that we upped our game when the next crisis came along, because as everybody probably knows, 95% of the economics profession was against Brexit on economic grounds, and arguing that we would be worse off than in the counterfactual of remaining in the EU if we did that. And the shock there was that there was such agreement, which can be quite rare inside economics, about the right course of action, and yet the general public, or at least a small majority of the general public, didn't seem to pay any attention to it at all. And I think that has really focused more economists on thinking about contemporary crises and policy responses.
The deviation of the electorate from the rational choice kind of analysis of what would make sense was really shocking and demoralizing to see. But isn't that a kind of proof of what you struggle with or wrestle with better yourself in the opening pages of your book, which is the extent to which economists have a kind of different model of the human person than reflects the reality of the complex irrationality of our decision-making processes?
I don't think economists really believe that their model of rational, individualistic, calculating economic man is a real model of people. So although there's some evidence from surveys that we tend to be a bit more like that ourselves than the average person, I don't think it's a very big gap. We know that that's a construct, it's kind of thought experiment to see how that rational agent would decide how to do things. And I think both for the financial crisis and for the shock of the Brexit vote, it was not noticing things going into them that meant that we were taken by surprise. And in the case of the financial crisis, it was not noticing how complex and interconnected the shadow banking system had become, such that it was concentrating risk rather than spreading risk. And before the Brexit vote, the gap was not knowing what was happening in different parts of the country, in big cities versus small towns in different regions, partly because it just wasn't very easy to download the statistics and do fancy econometrics on them, so people didn't look at it very much. And that's a gap that has been filled big time since then, and has led to all of the debate here about levelling up.
This is the point at which we can start talking about the digital economy, because it is an aspect, or it's the driver, I suppose, depending on which end of the telescope you look down.
The digital economy has very different features from the economy that we think about in the textbooks, and the economy that's the sort of benchmark model that anybody working in economic analysis in Whitehall would default to. And the workhouse model, the theory of the firm, is about individual decision makers making rational choices given the information that they have, and in a sort of fixed context, not thinking about the strategic issues and the dynamics. And you can't do that in the digital economy, because there are huge economies of scale. I mean, there always were in the economy, now they're everywhere and they're enormous. And so you're going to get markets that have winner-take-all features. They tend to have one or two dominant players, and you want ideally a possibility of change, so that somebody who comes along with a better search engine can knock Google out of that top perch and take over itself.
But they're quickly monopolistic, essentially.
They're quickly monopolistic. And they're also linking us together much more. Partly through network effects, the fact that I get much more benefit out of a digital service the more other users there are, whether that's restaurants on OpenTable or people using search to make the searches better. And there are these spillovers in data. Data is useful when you can combine different bits of it to get useful information, but you can reveal private information about other people or have it revealed about yourself in ways that you don't want to if other people join up your data. And so it's a much more collective action set of issues in thinking about digital policy. And so starting from static, individualist, rational, perfect information is absolutely the wrong place to start thinking about policy for the digital economy. And even some challenging areas about competition policy or about data privacy, so areas where economics brushes up against the law, as it were.
You've occupied three very specific different positions. It's like you've been in government, you've been in the university, and you've been in, I'm kind of loosely saying, in journalism. Which of those three do you think gave you the best insight into the common object of your study?
I think they've all been, it's been an advantage to do all three of those things, I think, because they do relate to each other. And the academics have some influence on how policymakers think. The politicians are responding to the journalism. So I think it's been an advantage to do all of them. And it's a very atypical career path. Most people who are academics at my age will have been academics for all their career. I think actually it also helps with academic research because you have a better idea of what the questions are that you need to be asking, or what kind of data you need to be going out and creating or finding. And I wish there was more sort of movement between sectors of the kind I suppose you get in France or the United States, where they've got a different sort of setup.
We should talk about diversity in another sense in both our professions, gender and colour diversity, if I could just put it in that sort of telegrammatic way. You think, and you make a very convincing argument to the effect that the absence of diversity in your profession means that we get poorer science.
It is, and I would add also social background or class, to use the old-fashioned word.
Yes.
Because in this country, in the UK, and because the maths A level is now required to do economics, there's an increasing private school dominance with the social gradient that comes with that, because state schools will often not know about the maths and send people to business studies, which is more considered to be more useful anyway. It's the narrowness of the range of ideas that you bring to bear, partly in addressing a policy question or research question, but also even in defining the research questions and understanding what the challenges are that people not like you face in their lives.
It's your sense, is it? I think you mentioned in your book somewhere that economics is, in a sense, a kind of bastion of white male dominance. Is that right? I think you said that, something like, I mean, not quite in that crass language, but you said something to that effect.
Something like that. I mean, it is bizarre that it's one of the most male-dominated subjects, along with computer science and philosophy, actually, and maths are also very male-dominated. And there are obviously subjects that have the opposite gender skew, English or psychology. I'm not sure that's any healthier for them than ours is. So 50-50 is probably unattainable and undesirable, but something better than we have now would be good.
I mean, did you find that that it was difficult to make a career for yourself because of gender?
I don't think I've had major obstacles, but like most professional women, have experienced many minor irritations. In my first job in the Treasury, it was the days of paper, of course, not quite quill pens, but things sent around on paper, with a circulation list typed at the top. And they put me down as Miss Diane Coyle, and I said, no, I want to be Ms. And they said, we don't do that here. So I said, okay, I'll be Doctor. And my female boss said, oh, I've got a doctorate, I'll be Doctor too, instead of Mrs. And we were the only two PhDs in that particular division, so that didn't go down very well. But it's all the usual things that many women will recognise, being talked over at meetings, interrupted, or in a meeting, you say something full of insight and it gets attributed to one of the men instead. So I think we've all had that kind of experience, but I've been lucky in not experiencing worse, as many have.
Yes. I mean, I suppose asking the question and hearing the answer, speaking as a man itself, is enriching as a kind of micro example of what you were talking about a little while ago. I mean, which allows me to say, I hope within a kind of accomplished BBC segue way, that I very much enjoyed listening to you and talking with you for the last hour. I want to thank you very much. And I really do want to say this is such an enjoyable, interesting book. And as a book by an economist that doesn't have a single equation in it, unless I missed one, it's much, even on that basis, but on many other bases, much to be recommended. So thank you very much, Diane Coyle, for joining us. And
thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation, Anthony. Thank you. And thank you for all the questions.
All the very best. Bye-bye. Bye.
The Mishcon Academy Digital Sessions. To access advice for businesses that is regularly updated, please visit mishcon.com.